Three.
My name is Bruce Young III, and we're talking about a 30 Ford Roadster that I started building back in 1953. The idea behind the car, I got my inspiration from Hot Rod magazine, which I started taking in 1950. From that time on, I looked at all the cars that were being built, published in Hot Rod magazine that were built in the late 40s after the war. Decided then that I wanted to try to find a Roadster to build. So I was looking for a 32 Ford, couldn't find one in the southeast anywhere, so I got a 30. And the gentleman that sold it to me for $100. And then I got a friend of mine to load it on a trailer and bring it to my house. From there, a friend of mine, two of us, started disassembling it. And we took off everything off the A-model at the time. And then I parted out all the parts. I kept the frame, the body, and the windshield, and that's about all of the original that was kept at the time that I can recall. The guy that kind of inspired me to continue with the project, his name was Buddy House. He was a local car nut, mechanic, street racer. Grew up with a bunch of guys who used to hop up 40 Ford and stuff like that. So Buddy worked with me to give me a few ideas. At that time, I was interested in Buicks as an engine. A lot of guys were using Ford flatheads as well, and Cadillac engines, Oldsmobile engines, and then the Chevrolets were coming along. But I wanted a Buick, so I found a '56 Buick Century that had been wrecked, and the engine was still good. And I got that at Willie's Auto Parts here in Chattanooga. And from that, next thing I was looking for was a LaSalle 39 transmission, because I was told it had strong teeth in the gearbox and good bearings. And then I started looking for a Columbia 2-speed axle, which came out of a 47 or 48 Lincoln, I believe, and so we put that in the back of it. The front part of the car is a 34 Ford axle, but the brakes on front and rear are 47 and 48 Lincoln. And my dad was a big inspiration to help me. He was very mechanical, a lot more than I was at the time, and he taught me how to weld. He could weld some parts of the car. I welded, but all the grunt work I did myself. And then like the fit up of the headers and cutting that out, cutting the body so it would be channeled over the frame. We dropped it to the bottom of the frame. We, of course, it's called Z, the back, so that the spring perch in the back is higher than it normally is, so the car sits lower. We took the axle and had it dropped about 2.5 or 3 inches, I don't remember exactly. And then we went from there. My two friends were Eddie Hendricks and Sam Hammer. Eddie's now a retired Church of Christ minister, and unfortunately Sam Hammer is deceased. My dad was a big influence to me because he was very mechanical. He knew how to weld, and he also knew he was a machinist. And he was in the war, and instead of going to fight, he went to the Charleston Navy Yard to build boats. But anyhow, he helped me a great deal. He taught me how to weld. He did a lot of the welding on the car. And of course we channeled the body about frame width, which is roughly 3 to 4 inches. And we flipped the spring perch in the back so it would work closer. And we Z'd it and offset it in the back. And then the Columbia 2-speed, the reason I got that, so it would give me 6 forward speeds, 3 in the transmission, 2 in the axle, so you could have 2 first, 2 second, and 2 thirds. In effect, if you're on the highway, you'd be in overdrive. If you wanted to go fast, you put it in the lower range. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the vacuum shift mechanism, so to change it, you had to get out of the car, climb underneath it, and flip the lever if you want low range or high range. The steering sector is a 48 or 49, and I believe it's a Ford pickup truck at the time. It had originally a 56 or 57 Mercury Cruiser steering wheel on it, and the steering column's 32. So that's that part of it. The front shell is a 32 grill shell. I found it about 25 miles from here. Unfortunately, about a month earlier, the whole car had been sold except for that 32 shell, so I was able to buy the 32 grill shell with the shell as well as the grill itself. All the chrome work that was done on the car was hand polished by hand by either myself or my friends. That was including the wishbone that had been split, the axle, let's see, tie rod ends, tie rods, as well as the backing plates on the drums, on the drum brakes. By March of '58 or thereabouts, we finally got the car painted and upholstered. So we did, the interior of the car was in red and white, the body was painted white, and the top was black. It did not have roll-up windows. It had side curtains in it, which means you had to take them in and out. If you wanted to be cool in the wintertime, it was cold. But nonetheless, it didn't have a heater in it either. So there was no heater inside the car. And but I made a dash out of mahogany across the front for all, there's 8 instruments in it, I believe. Tack and a speedometer plus gas, fuel, oil pressure, oil temperature, water temperature, and a few other gauges. The first trip that we took the car, Eddie and I drove it to Florida in about July of 1958. And we were down there a couple of days, and we met a bunch of girls on the beach, and they wanted to go for rides and all those type of things. Had to warn them about the headers, because the headers came down the side of the car, and the muffler tucked barely underneath the car, so that if you got out and you had bare legs, if you wasn't careful, you was going to get burnt. So that was one thing that we had to be cautious about. And then we were cruising around Daytona one night, decided to go down into the Daytona Beach area, down to the old Daytona Beach track. And we went down there and saw it, could go in, it was locked. Drove across the bridge, and Eddie and I were together. Did not come to a full stop at an intersection. Turned right, and about a mile up the road I saw blue lights, red lights chasing me. It wasn't blue, it was red lights then. So I flipped the switch and it turns off the tail lights and the brake lights. So he thought, when we finally, I told Eddie, I said, Eddie, we're going to get stopped, we might as well just pull off. So the officer came up, he said, I thought you were gone and out of sight. I said, no sir, I wasn't. He said, what happened to your tail lights, brake lights? I said, I don't know, they must have gone out, must be a short. So we did that. He booked me, we went to the jail. And between Eddie and myself, all the money we had is what it took to post the bond to get out. And from then on, the rest of the week, we slept on the beach because we couldn't pay for our motel bill. We wired our parents, and they sent us a little bit of money by telegraph. And that was our first experience of being stopped by a car, by a cop, and living on the beach and taking a shower when you come in from the beach at the pool house, at the motel. The lady there was kind enough to let us still use the shower, so we scrubbed for food and did whatever we could around there to help people. They gave us a little money, and we stayed there, and then we drove back. Well, we were in Florida, and I met one of the girls we met was from Cincinnati, and she invited me to come up to Cincinnati to visit with her the latter part of the summer. So we set up by telephone, and so I got in the car, got permission from my parents to drive all the way to Cincinnati on the 2-lane roads all the way up. Poured down rain all the way till I got to Cincinnati. When I got there and went over to her house, her father would not let me come in. He said, no one who drives a car like that needs to be seeing my daughter. So we still saw each other, but I never did go into her house. I stayed a couple of days and turned around and came back. So that was the end of that relationship. And so I had the car, that was in the summer, or excuse me, a lot of part of summer of '58, and the car was doing exceptionally well. We took it to several drag strips, one in Chattanooga, one down in Atlanta called Dothan, I think it was, Georgia. And when I drag raced with it, we did pretty well, particularly when you took the Columbia 2-speed axle, put it in load range. But there was a problem. The problem basically was it had hydraulic lifters, and they failed to pump up when you went over about 5,000 RPM, so the engine was shut off. So we changed the hydraulic lifters out to adjustable lifters, and then we changed the intake manifold because all I had was a four barrel original carburetor on it. Changed it out to a 3 Strongberg 2 barrels. Had 3 2-barrel carburetors on it. Everything else in the car was original. Now, you may have noticed in looking at some of the pictures or something that the car engine has a big engine bay. If you look real close at the cowl of the car, you'll see that the cowl on the car body has been reversed. What I did, I drilled out all the rivet, the spot welds on the cowl, reversed the cowl where it came into the cabin of the car more, so that gave us more engine room, distributor room, header room, fan room, cooling room. And at one time there was a hood on the top when I had it, so you had a partially covered hood where you still could see the carburation and the headers and everything there. All the chrome work, like I said earlier, was done locally, but we had to hand polish everything to get a nice shine because no one in town was doing that. So we hand polished everything that was chrome. Now, I graduated 58 as a senior, and I wanted to go off to school, and I didn't have the money. I worked 2 jobs here in Chattanooga, working at used car lot, hustling cars back and forth, and working on the parking lot. And I went to a local university called UC at the time. It's now called UTC. And I drove the car back and forth to school every day. I drove the car all the time, rain, sleet, snow, it didn't make any difference. It was a car to be driven. Now, I want to make a comment about the dash if I hadn't done that. The dash is mahogany. It came from a company, Chris Craft, that built boats here in Chattanooga. I went down there, got a piece of mahogany, 1.25 inches thick, I believe, and then cut out all the places for the speedometer, tachometer, oil temperature, oil pressure, water temperature, fuel gauge, vacuum gauge, and so forth. Had it all finished out, really looked real nice. Had it leaned against the wall at my house, and my sister came by and knocked something against it, put a little gash in it. Really got to me, but nonetheless, I decided not to refinish it. All I did was put another coat of varnish on it, and that gash is still there today, and you can see it, as the current owner Kevin knows. On drag racing, the car did pretty good most of the time, but I wasn't a very good drag racer to start with. But we did do a little bit of street racing with some people who wanted to street race, and we did a few times of that, and it was safe. It wasn't at night, it was in daylight time. I drove the car for 4 years, 2 years at UTC, and then I did UC, and then I wanted to go off to college. And so I went to UT in Knoxville, and finally ran out of money, and I had to sell the car in order to have enough money to continue to go to school on. So I sold it to someone here in Chattanooga, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, and he kept it here for a year or two after that. So I sold the car in late 61, early 62, and after having it all that time. Didn't really want to sell it, wanted to keep it, but going back and forth with no heater, bad weather, driving 100 and something miles to school about once a month wasn't the most favorable conditions to be in. As I said, didn't have windows, didn't have a heater, so therefore it was kind of chilly in the wintertime. I may have mentioned to you that we showed the car. The car was showed in Chattanooga 2 or 3 times at car shows. Also went to Birmingham for a 3-day show in Birmingham in '59, I believe it was, and then for a 2-day show in Atlanta, and then a 2-day show in Nashville. That's the only 3 shows I can remember out of town that I showed the car. Always got a trophy. Always got the best of the show trophy every time. I thought the car was gone. Had never seen it, never heard of it from anybody anymore. And everybody in my family, all my cousins, and of course my parents at the time, my grandparents, all knew about the car. And people who I've never seen in years and years have walked up to me and said, "You're Bruce Young. You built a hot rod when you were in high school." And I remembered it was white with a red interior. It had a Buick engine that was gold. That's true. The engine block was painted gold at the time. And so it was a surprise to me to see the car again. This is kind of unique. My grandson, who at that time was 10, wanted to go to a local car show here in Chattanooga. So I purchased the tickets and we went through the show. When I walked into the exhibit hall, I told him, I said, Christopher, to the right is a car that I think Pop built back in the 50s, 53 through 58. He said, really? And I said, yes. He said, let's go look at it. So we walked around it. He said to me, Pop, it said this car was built in Arizona. Maybe it was California. I said, no, it's built in Chattanooga, son. I can tell you for sure that Pop and my father, your great-grandfather, built this car. And so I started telling him everything about it. So about that time, I walked over to the where it was roped off and asked the gentleman who came to it, did he know who the owner was? And he said, yes, my name is Kevin. So I asked if we could step inside. So we stepped inside and I pointed all the things out that I thought to my grandson, and Kevin was listed. And Kevin felt maybe that I might know something about it because a lot of the information was listed on his display board in front of the car. And there had been some changes. For example, the aluminum valve covers were not original by me, and the headers had been changed and they were not original by me. And a lot of little minor things, like the gas cap used to be on the right rear fender. It was now in the trunk. The trunk was now been louvered, and I didn't louver it at the time. It was a different roll bar. And that's when I told Kevin, I said, that's not the original roll bar. The original roll bar is welded to the chassis itself, and it's out of pipe, not tube. And Kevin said, that's correct. And I told him, I said, if you look at the dash, I said, let me check the dash. If you look at the dash, in between the speedometer and the tachometer, you'll find this little bitty gash. It's in the middle, about the size of your thumbnail, the white of your thumbnail. And he said it was there, and he knew right then that I knew all about the car and I had built it. The car had several sets of wheels. Originally it had wire wheels on it, which were the original Model A wheels with different tires. And then when we took the car to Daytona again in 1960, I changed out the steel wheels and put moon hubcaps on it. And I've got a picture of it there. I've got some other pictures. And so I hadn't seen the car until it came back to Chattanooga, and Kevin's given me a history on where the car has been, and I didn't know it all. So it is really, really unique, and very many chances in a million that I would ever see that car again. We'll take a minute to talk about the rear end section of the car. When I found the Columbia 2-speed axle, I saw that when I put the Buick engine into it, there was not going to be enough room, the position of the body. So we had not welded the body to the frame yet. So I talked with my dad about it. I said, I think, Pop, that we can flip the left and right housing and put the spring perchers in the front instead of being in the back side. That's the way the Fords were built back then, the spring perchers on the back side of the axle housings. So we decided to do that, and it worked very well. And we, of course, had to redo the torque tube and split the wishbone on it in the back and shorten the axle. It did not have an anti-slip in the back, limited locks, a lock, what do you call them? A lock, anti-lock on the rear end. So you could spin one wheel before the other one would buy. But the Columbia 2-speed was really neat because you could drive it around town, have a lot of fun with it. Then when you went off on a highway, you could put it in high gear. The reason for flipping it was to be able to move the body back on the engine, on the chassis, so that you'd have more engine room. That's why another reason we inverted the cowl. So right now, the inside of the car is a little bit cramped compared, because when you flip the cowl, you shorten it up by roughly 8 inches inside. So you gain 8 inches outside compared to it being inside by doing. Gas tank used to be still probably the same place. The battery's in the back. You had to run long cables all the way up to the starter. Inside the engine with a LaSalle transmission, of course, the main shaft does not fit the crankshaft of the Buick. I'll have to go back for just a few minutes. And the car was originally white, and the first time I drove it to my high school was in May of '58. And that was because so many of my friends that time. We were really close, wanted me to bring it and show it to everybody there, including the principal and the teachers and other people there. They didn't believe I had built one. So this is a unique story. We drove, as I mentioned earlier, to Daytona, and of course it's convertible, but we didn't have any way for our windshield wiper blades to work, so we put 2 windshield wiper blades on it, and you had to wipe your windshield with a hand crank back and forth, left and right. And that's what my friend Eddie did. As we went down the road and got wet, we had to stop, put the top up. And then a couple other things I thought might be interesting to you is that the frame has been boxed all the way around except from the motor mounts forward. The motor mounts I cut out, my father welded those in, and then the gearbox, the steering box has to have, because I didn't want it to have to offset the engine. My father and I came up with a way to build a box into the frame so the steering gearbox would not have to be offset. That's just a couple of little unique things about it. At one time, all the undercarriages, the torque tube, the rear axle housings were chrome plated. Currently they're not, but Kevin plans to redo it. Like I said, the engine was gold. Another thing you might like to know about is that it really looks great now. When I first saw the car with my grandson and met Kevin at the trade show, at the car show, it was kind of a dull, flat black, which I didn't think was very pretty, and I told Kevin that if he ever redid it, he needed to paint it white or pick another color, preferably white or black. So he has done an excellent job. I have not seen the car since I walked up today down at the chute, and I was really impressed with the quality of work that he has had done to it, or he himself has done. Kevin is a genuine, true car buff. He knows a lot about cars. He knows how to work on them and take care of them, and I hope he will keep this car for some time, and it will be a very nice show car, and he needs to drive it occasionally on the street just for the pleasure of driving. I drove it for almost 5 years. I didn't want to sell it. I needed the money to go to school, and that's just the way it wound up. I did not know where it went from 1962 until 2013. That's how long I never knew the car existed anymore. So thank you for this time. I hope you've enjoyed what I have to say. You need to give Kevin a call. He can tell you more about it in that 50-year span, which I hadn't seen it. And also he can get you in touch with me if you want to know more about the car. All right, I left out something I thought might be of interest to you. The chopped top, we had to cut the windshield post to chop the top, and it was been chopped about a total of 6 inches, 4 to 6, I don't remember exactly. But the posts are cut, and then they had to be brazed, welded back together. And my dad did that because he could do it with a very good, clean weld pass and made it look beautiful. And then I had to polish them all down and to make them look nice when chrome plated. And then there was a gap between the bottom of the windshield and the top of the cowl of the car. And that was filled out with a piece of rubber. It was white rubber that we got. It came off a tread of a Greyhound bus step. As you went into a Greyhound bus, that's what it came from. So we had a white strip beneath the windshield to the white bottom. Since that time, I think it's been changed. But a lot of more little details that I could go on and elaborate on, but I won't take time today. Thank you.